Appalachia, a word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountaintop to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks who live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by a family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Come with me, and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that come from within my beloved mountains. And we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some from outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. I gotta apologize for that mess I called a video last week. I'd say most folks listen instead of watch anyhow, but and they may be wondering right now what the heck I'm talking about, but for some reason I wasn't able to publish my video as I edited it. So I had to go ahead and publish the raw unedited version, but the story was still there, and I thought it was a good enough one to be told. So thank you for enduring that punishment. Anyway, when we all get out of school, we have ambitions to do the best we can with what we have to work with. You know, you got to take the job that's available and give it all you got. That comes with the old feelings of wishing that we could come up with a way to do a little better. Sometimes there's folks that have it real good and still have them same thoughts. You know, if it's a good here, you know, what is it a couple of rungs up the ladder from here? Most people keep their head down, do their job, and fortune comes their way later on. Some, well, they arrive at a way to make money that could make the pastor cuss. Today we're headed down to South Carolina. So my hillbilly kin, gather around and let me tell you about a couple of sisters that had a pair so big that they had to keep a wash tub with wheels on it to haul them around in. Darlene and Charlene Schuler were twin sisters born to parents Bo and Stella Schuler in West Columbia, South Carolina, on December of 1960. Now, Bo was a plumber that owned his own business, so, clearly he went home every night, took a bath in cash right after supper. But Stella was what they call a homemaker. Back when I was growing up and I was a little feller, we called them mama, which means that they were a superhuman dynamo that was going from the time their feet hit the floor in the morning until they fell in bed at night, and then some. And the Schulers, they actually lived a pretty modest life, so apparently Bo the plumber was ahead of the plumbers make as much as doctors wave had hit the country back in the day. Charlene was considered the dominant of the two. They probably figured that out after seeing her treat her sister like Mo treated Larry and Curly while they were laying in the crib. She was an excellent student and in school and pretty much stayed focused on her studies. Now, Darlene, she was more outgoing and would rather have fun with friends and do any kind of schoolwork. After they graduated, they both went to Clemson University. Charlene studied psychology. Now, that kind of tastes like preparations for shades of manipulation with some contemplation stirred in for good measure to me, but that's just me thinking. Darlene, well, she studied early childhood education, which really takes a special person who really cares about people to do something like that, and patience that are unending. But while they were in college, well, they realized for the first time in their lives what money really looked like. They were surrounded by people who come from a buttload USA. They saw them that most of the girls there were on some kind of scholarship because their parents made nice donations to certain folks for certain things. They had nice cars and the best clothes and thought the word budget was a cuss word. And with the twins coming from the rather modest means, well, that made them want to work that much harder because they wanted that kind of life for themselves. Now, they graduated in 1983, and Charlene went to work for South Carolina Budget and Control Board, while Darlene became a third grade teacher. So they got off to a pretty good start, I'd say. Wasn't long before Charlene met a feller by the name of Wayne Corley. It just happened that his lineage went straight back to the very family that helped found Lexington, South Carolina. He was a CPA, and he did very well. So on top of making his own money, he was pretty well steeped in the family cash too. That, along with being a regular stud muffin, made him a pretty good catch for Charlene. It wasn't long before the two lovebirds got married. Now, Darlene, being known as the follower of the two sisters, had to follow in her sister's footsteps and married a man named Lee Wooten. Now, Lee was the sales manager of a company that sold construction supplies, so he wasn't a cheapskate either. So both sisters married men that made real good money, and that afforded them exactly what they wanted, which was a taste of the upper crust. Now, we all know the best part of a pie is the upper crust, don't we? That's where the lovely and gracious Mrs. Bentley always sprinkles the cinnamon and sugar on her famous fall pie, which is, we'll probably be having one of them next weekend. But back to the story. It wasn't long before they both started their own families. They each had 2 children. While all of that's going on, they're getting involved in all the parties in the community. When anybody has anything going on, their names is always at the top of the list. Now, everything was just going on, exactly the way they always wanted it to go. That was until, and it's always a but or until, ain't it? But that was until the leader, Charlene, decided that she wanted a little bit more. If it was good where they were, I reckon she wondered how much better it must be a little further up toward the nosebleed section. In other words, if a Lincoln drove that good, I wonder what a Bentley feels like. Yeah, I could sink to a tasteless joke there, but I bet you're already thinking it, so I'll just leave it right there. Anyway, she figured that by going into business with her sister, there wouldn't be no limit to how far up they could go. So in 1991, they started a hardware distribution company that they called C&D Distributors. Now, that stood for Charlene and Darlene. 2 years into it, they got a whole new opportunity. They met somebody that did government contract work, and it would be pretty easy for them to get into it and become certified government distributors because, they were women and they preferred women contractors for some reason back then. And I think they still allow so many women for contracting. So they got all registered up as government contractors with the U.S. Department of Defense. They had a deal where they would send out supplies that could be found pretty much in any hardware store, like pipe elbows, pipe joints, nuts, or bolts. The little warehouse looked like a hardware store. They'd walk around there filling orders and ship them on out to the Department of Defense for a small shipping and handling fee, of course. It wasn't paying a whole lot, but it was steady work. They realized that they wasn't making as much as they want, so they decided to expand their little business. And they bought some 2 acres of land in Lexington and rented out a storehouse to go with it and an appliance company and hired them to run the deliveries for them. And that's when C&D Deliveries was born. The company would deliver appliances all over the state of South Carolina. They had up to 1,000 deliveries a day. That business ended up doing really good, while the distribution business, it was kind of a little bit behind. So in November 1997, the sisters are hard work there at the office like they always did, and going through the paperwork, typing up invoices and shipping labels to send out to the Department of Defense. And one of the sisters accidentally put the invoice number in the column where the shipping cost was supposed to be. Nobody noticed the error for a few weeks until when one of them went and found a deposit in the bank for $5,000 from a payment made by the military for the shipment of a few light bulbs. Of course, they decided to return the money and go about their business. But they ended up talking about how easy it was just to rip the government a new one, and with that one and that one simple mistake, and they got paid a ridiculous amount of money with no questions asked. That sowed a seed that went plumb to the core of both of them. Now we all know back in 1997, the federal government was known for their frugal spending and meticulous bookkeeping, ain't we? Yeah, that's sarcasm. So the next day they decided to test the waters a little bit and bill the Department of Defense for shipping a part that cost a few cents. They billed them $1,000 for it. If anybody said anything, they were just going to claim that it was a mistake, just like the $5,000 one was, and they'd pay it back. And just like that, just like the first time, the invoice was paid, and the money was put into their account, and nobody said anything. This time, they didn't pay it back. They decided to celebrate by going and getting their hairs and nails did while they both wore their new outfits. Now they're now on to something, and they're going to go from there and start charging $1,000 shipping. Then they went on up to thousands of dollars for shipping, then on up to hundreds of thousands of dollars for shipping. And between 1997 and 2000, they charged the U.S. government unbelievable amounts of money. They charged $403,000 for shipping 6 machine screws worth about $60. Then they charged $445,000 for shipping a $9 pipe elbow. So, for shipping a mere $70 worth of stuff, they're pushing millionaire status. I hear you. Stop while you're ahead. Oh no, folks. They're just getting this wampa cat rolling. They charged $492,000 for shipping an $11 machine thread plug. So everything was rolling along just swimmingly. And on September 11th, 2001, yeah, I remember that. I think we all do. Well, that's the day that the Twin Towers in New York City came down. Of course, the U.S. government ends up going to war in Afghanistan and Iraq to fight the Taliban. So, at that point, the military activity really ramps up, and that leads to military business going through the roof. The military even contacted their contractors to let them know that they'd better be stocking up on supplies because they're going to need extra everything just as fast as they could get it. That put the whole thing on a massive dose of steroids through a direct IV pump. Before you know it, the sisters are buying vacation homes, high-end luxury cars, big old boats, and expensive jewelry. They're taking off on highly exclusive vacations and taking their whole families and all their friends with them, too. They'd pick up the whole tab for travel, food, wet bar, and all the works, gadgets, buttons, and upgrades. Nothing but the best. Of course, when you're keeping $50 bills in the outhouse for toilet paper, you start getting competitive with your sister. Now, one would go buy a nice beach house, then the other would go buy a better one, a bigger one. And it got so out of hand and so bad that they ended up owning 4 beach houses on the same beach. Like we always say in the mountains, some folks just can't hide money. What would all that be without each of them shelling out $250,000 for their own adjoining boxes at Clemson Stadium so they could watch the game while looking down their noses at the plebes sitting outside suffering the cold? Actually, it wasn't that bad. They donated a whole bunch of charities all over the community, and they just out of the blue give expensive gifts. They bought a brand new convertible for one of their workers for her 18th birthday. Now, they probably wrote it all off on taxes, I reckon, and I reckon if their dad couldn't bathe in his plumber money, they was going to make up for it in shipping fees. Somewhere in the middle of the melee, they decided to form 2 other companies called Industrial Building Materials and United Technical Systems, and that's how they planned to launder the money. The business weren't nothing but just a name and a P.O. box and a bank account. Then they bought a franchise that made them kind of thick, hot cookies that you see in the franchises in the mall. It was called the Toll House. It was located in the shopping centers, so they expected it to take right off. Didn't do too well because folks said that they'd come by and end up eating all the dadgum cookies. I tend to believe it because that was about the time that the sisters started having weight problems. Of course, that's when they decided that they needed gastric bypass surgery for both of them, and then one of their husbands too, which was a $25,000 surgery a pop. They weren't charging the obligatory $400,000 some odd dollars for the shipping of a $10 part anymore. That'd be crazy, I'd say. War is hell and a dang sight more expensive, so the price went up by 2005. By then, they had made $20 million and spent all but $8 of it. They were spending it just about as fast as they made it. And in September of 2006, they did what they've been doing for 10 years. They billed the Department of Defense $998,000 for shipping 2 washers, costing about 38 cents. They cost 19 cents apiece. They billed the Department of Defense $998,000 for shipping and handling, and of course the government paid them, and all was good, until they accidentally sent another bill with the same invoice number on it for $960,000. Now the computer would read the invoice number and double check that it was good, and then send the payment automatically. If it found something wrong, it would reject payment. And there just so happened to be a government auditor looking over the Department of Defense's books when the computer went ding, ding, ding and spit the invoice out on his feet. I imagine he was wondering just exactly why it cost almost $1 million to ship something that didn't even cost $1. So they proceeded to look into it a little bit more, and they ended up getting the Government Criminal Investigation Service involved, who are part of the Department of Defense, by the way. And they officially launched a full-blown audit of the C&D distributors. That's when Charlene received a voicemail from the Department of Defense bureaucrat concerning an issue about the duplicate invoice, and if she could get back to him as soon as possible, well, that'd be real nice. She forwarded the call to Darlene and told her that she needed to take care of it. But Darlene never did. Remember, she's the one that likes to have fun with her friends rather than do homework, but I guess probably something like that. And, if I don't look at it, maybe it'll all just go away, too, probably stirred in there. Besides, there was money that needed spent, and bureaucrats can just get out of the way. By September 28th of 2006, the Department of Defense sent 34 certified letters to C&D distributors demanding repayment of almost $20 million. They did that because by then, the investigators done whipped out and looked at all the invoices and had their names on it and tallied it all up. There were 499 invoices sent out for 9 years with a shipping cost that totaled up to $72 million. The Department of Defense had paid about 112 of the invoices for the grand total of $21 million. So if the government would have paid everything, it would have been a $72 million take. I can only imagine sitting around the office after receiving $21 million, spending dang near all of it, then checking the mail every day for the other $51 million that's coming any day now. But Charlene was probably getting a little worked up and about ready to call him and ask him where the dead presidents was, and threatened to add late charges. For all I know, it didn't matter by then anyway, because neither sister responded to a single one of them 34 certified letters from the Department of Defense, so the Department of Defense decided to show up in person on October 2nd, 2006. Darlene just so happened to be at the warehouse by herself, probably putting a few washers in envelopes and adding zeros to shipping charges and mailing them off. Now, she was hard at it when the investigators showed up. The poor woman turned pale as a ghost, started stuttering so bad that she couldn't hardly answer their questions, probably sweating like a turkey on Thanksgiving, and would have crawled under the desk if she could. They can tell that she's in full panic mode to the point of nearly passing out. She's probably used to Charlene being the one that had all the answers that these people wanted to hear. Without Darlene's cheese was sliding right off her crisp Ritz cracker. Charlene rolled up at the warehouse right in the middle of Darlene's question and answer session with a room full of bureaucrats. She did notice that Darlene's office door was closed, and she did hear some voices on the other side, but she thought Darlene was just talking on the phone, or maybe somebody that had stopped by was having a talk with her. So she just made a quick stop by her office, which was probably like walking into King Tut's tomb, what with all the gold, silver, and precious stones that everything was made out of. Then she left, didn't bother Darlene, and took her daughter on to soccer practice. Walked right out in and then walked right back out and didn't have a clue what was going on. Meanwhile, the investigators were sitting across the desk from Darlene, explaining how they were going to be up her rear end with their mining hats on until somebody answered some questions on this mess. Darlene finally asked them to come back the next day so she could have time to research what was going on and hopefully clear it all up for them then. So they got up and swaggled out of where like bureaucrats do, probably taking note of the high-end office decor that was likely wall to wall and treetop tall, stuffed in every square meter of space that there was for stuffing something. As quick as they walked out, Darlene's elevator hit the bottom floor and she folded up like a lawn chair mentally, because she knew that come tomorrow there wasn't no answer, or at least the one she could come up with, and she must have been pretty sure that even though Charlene was slicker than soap in a gold-plated bathtub floor, she wasn't going to come up with anything that'll make this go away either. Now, this one was serious, and somebody was going to the pokey, and it was going to be a spell before they saw the light of day again. Not to mention how the entire country was going to look at them as nothing but grifters that took advantage of the country's service personnel by milking them out of millions of dollars. So poor Darlene, to her, the future just looked darker than midnight on a moonless night in the middle of nowhere. So Darlene, sitting there in her office, staring at the wall, and that's when she decided to write some letters to her two sons, her husband, and her sister Charlene. She then drove over to the post office, dropped them off, and then went home. Once she got there, one of her sons, who by then was in his mid to late teens, was there, so she piped up and said that she was thinking about getting his dad a gun for birthday. That's what, that was coming up pretty soon. She asked if she could borrow his to take the gun to the gun store to show him what she's looking for. Of course, not knowing squat about anything, the young feller says, "Sure, it's in my room, I'll grab it for you." So she takes it and heads out the door. She drives out right past the gun store and straight out of town. And while she's heading down the road, the investigators are trying to call her to check up on her because they knew she was tore up from the floor up. I hope she was wearing a Depends undergarment, because she probably thought that they were trying to find her so they could go ahead and just slap the cuffs on her right then. So she didn't answer. Since they couldn't get a hold of Darlene, the investigators called Charlene, who didn't even know they'd been by the office. After talking to them for a spell, she got right worried and called Darlene's family, but nobody knew where she was. That's when the son says, "Yeah, she came by and borrowed my gun earlier. She wanted to get Dad one to match it for his birthday, but now nobody knows where she is, and that throws a whole lot of worry into people. Being that they were twins and had that twin bond that we all hear so much about, Charlene pretty much knew where her sister was, so she drove, hell-bent for leather, out to Darlene's lake house. She rolls up and sees Darlene's car parked outside. She don't have a key to the place, so she knocks on the door and starts wearing the doorbell out. And there's no answer. So she might have bent the law or two a bit to find another way in, but it appeared to be a real bad situation, and you got to do what you got to do. I'd do it if it was one of my kin folks inside. Once she got in, she found Darlene laying on the floor. She was too late because Darlene had already ended it all. That left Charlene on her own for the first time in her whole existence, even before life actually officially started for her. I know the bond that I share with my brothers across the miles that we currently have between us, and I can't imagine how she felt right then. I don't imagine that it popped into her mind right off, but that left her to answer all them bureaucrat questions all by herself, too. Darlene must have just been in such a panic and so worked up that she thought that was her only way out of the whole mess. I've learned in my years here on the third rock from the sun that most of the time there ain't nothing as bad as it looks like first. Now, I'd say that she probably just didn't want to have to face her family and friends once they found out that what was going on. Most of the time, they're the very ones that would love you no matter what, and it's just sad that she didn't see that in time. Now, right about the time Darlene's funeral was going on, her letters that she wrote and sent out the evening the bureaucrats showed up started showing up in mailboxes of the folks she loved, her sons, her husband, and Charlene. Charlene's letter asked her to tell everybody that Darlene had found out that she had terminal cancer and decided to just end it all before the suffering kicked in. Charlene, being the fast thinker that she was, figured any port in a storm, so she decided to use the whole situation to throw Darlene so far up under the bus that she could taste where the bus had been for the last 3 weeks. Probably riding around in her gold-plated Rolls Royce, wearing silver-treated Russian sable fur coat, and sipping on some Taste of Diamond champagne, rolling up, and putting the window down and letting folks look at her while she's wearing the shades of emerald sunglasses and telling everybody that she could pin down how she was completely unaware that her late sister was throwing a scroggin from hell on the federal government. She said that she ran C&D delivery, but had squat to do with the distribution part of the company. Of course, investigators wondered if she thought that they had the IQ of a rock or something, thinking that she spent about $10 million, thinking it was all on the up and up or what. So they didn't buy the hogwash, especially after talking to people that said Charlene was the shot caller on everything when it came to who did what. Now, they all told investigators that she started the business and she was the brains behind the operation, and Darlene just did what Charlene told her to do. Funny thing happened 3 weeks after Darlene passed. There was a fire that broke out at the warehouse and contained box after box of documents that were pertinent to the investigation. Suspicious as it was, they couldn't prove that anybody snuck in there and set fire on it. If somebody did sneak in there and flick their bick, or maybe a gold-plated custom Zippo, didn't do any good as far as getting rid of anything. After they got the fire put out, the important documents were soaked with water used to put the fire out, and the government simply hung them up on the line and used blow dryers to dry them with. Then they reached up under the bus and pulled Darlene's reputation back out by finding Charlene's clear, unwavering signatures on the majority of the papers. That's when they knew for sure that she knew full well what was going on because she signed off on it. Note here, not saying that Charlene actually did it, but if you're bold enough to try to burn up evidence to get out of something, I guess you probably better make sure it actually burns up. So, that led to August 15th, 2007, when Charlene Corley pled guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy, one for money laundering and one for fraud, wire fraud, that is. Now, each sentence carried a maximum of 20 years. Now, she bonded out until her sentencing, which came on March 2009. Now, for even though she had a lot of character witnesses show up and testify, people came up and talked about how she donated to charities and how the sisters did all these good things for folks. Now, I reckon they forgot that it was all funded with the money they ripped off from the Department of Defense during wartime. I figure that's why the judge wasn't having any of it. The judge said that it wasn't only a crime against the community, it was a crime against America, and they were making money off the backs of the soldiers. So when the gavel dropped, Charlene was sentenced to 6.5 years and was ordered to pay back $15.5 million to the Department of Defense because they done grabbed up $7 million in assets, including beach houses and all the land that Charlene owned. Charlene served her time in a women's federal prison in Marianna, Florida. Now, she must have got a little time knocked off for good behavior because she was released on February 7th, 2015. I hope you got something out of our story today, folks. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, or if you're watching on Spotify, YouTube, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to, subscribe and follow us wherever you listen or watch. Now, come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend podcast group on Facebook where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend, and I will see you then.